Thank you very much, Diego, for the invitation to be here today and for the introduction. I must apologise that I cannot present in Spanish, so I will try and speak slowly, and I hope that the message comes out clearly. The topic that I've been asked to talk about is developing adaptation strategies against climate change, the Australian experience. The structure of the presentation is as shown. I will give you a very brief snapshot of Australia, the nation. I'll talk about irrigation in Australia, a brief history and the build-up to the millennium drought that started in 1990s, the policy response that the government has taken, the technology response, and I'll give you a snapshot of what the modernised industry in Australia looks like. This is a map of Australia. It's a very large continent, 4,000 kilometres in breadth, 3,000 kilometres in depth. Some key statistics: it's a large continent, 6 states, 2 territories, a population of about 25 million people. The population is primarily concentrated on the coastal fringe. There's a large desert in the middle. The Murray-Darling Basin is where most of the irrigated agricultural activity takes place. There's extreme variability in the climate season to season, and Australia is a net exporter of agricultural commodities. Irrigation accounts for 5% of the tilled agricultural land, but produces 30% of all agricultural production. Agriculture uses between 50 to 70% of the water consumed in Australia, and irrigation uses 90% of that. The irrigated areas fluctuate between 2 and 2.5 million hectares, depending on seasonal availability. There are 40,000 irrigators in Australia. The value of the irrigation production varies between $9 to $11.5 billion per year. Due to the extensive variability in the climate, we have a lot of water storage. 80,824,000 million litres of water storage for irrigation, hydroelectric generation and urban. Annual usage is highly variable, between 10,700 gigalitres in 2005-2006, and the next year it was 7,636 gigalitres, with a substantial reduction in the area irrigated due to the less availability. Irrigation began in Australia in small local developments in 1890. Unlike the British system of riparian rights, the legislation defined that the state owned the water and they codified the water rights. The structure shown in the picture, Goulburn Weir, was the first structure built for irrigation diversion between 1887 and 1891. Severe drought shortly after, coupled with the increasing development of the inland areas from the 1890s onwards, and the ongoing financing challenges, led to a realisation that small individual water supply schemes were doomed for failure. In 1905, the Victorian State Rivers and Water Supply Commission was formed to manage and develop the state's water resources. Similar models were followed in the other Australian states. And water is primarily a state responsibility, but the federal or the national government assumed some greater powers with the 2007 Water Act that was a response to the Millennium Drought. From the early 1900s, there were two significant eras of development, punctuated by the First World War and the Great Depression. The process of development continued with a pause during the Second World War and the construction of a major scheme to divert water that would flow to the Southern Ocean to the inland to the Murray-Darling Basin, known as the Snowy Mountain Schemes. There were few changes to the methods used to operate these systems, perhaps with the introduction of motor vehicles and two-way radios in the 50s and the 60s. But the first significant management change occurred in the 1970s as a result of waterlogging and salinisation killing fruit trees in the Goulburn Valley. And this is maps of groundwater depths to water table. The red area is less than 2 metres, mobilising salts, killing trees. This led to major programs of reform to manage salinity in the Murray-Darling Basin. It ultimately led to a cap on the amount of water that could be extracted from the river system, and there were many management strategies to do with salinity and drainage, land and water management plan development, whole farm plans, the introduction of laser grading and reuse systems to support surface irrigation methods, and nutrient management strategies. The development period really stopped in the Murray-Darling Basin in 1979 with the completion of the largest dam in the system, Dartmouth Dam. It also marked the beginning of a major policy and technology reform process that is continuing today. In 1984, the State Rivers and Water Supply Commission was replaced with an outer budget government entity, the Rural Water Corporation, with a skills-based board. This organisation introduced major reforms: the introduction of Customer Water Services Committee, the introduction of full cost recovery of water from the end users, including the payment of an annual annuity to replace assets in the future, a major focus on increasing efficiency and reducing the cost of water delivery, marked by the computerisation of water ordering and delivery scheduling processes in 1987 and subsequent productivity improvements. The separation of land and water rights, enabling farmers to buy and sell water separately from land. The introduction of SCADA and telemetry technology in 1992. The introduction of interactive voice technology in 1994, enabling farmers to directly order water from a software system. The reforms continued, and in the mid-90s, the governments of New South Wales and Victoria devolved their interests in irrigation. There was an autonomous government-owned regional authorities established in Victoria in 1994, and the government-owned irrigation districts in New South Wales were gifted to the farmers to self-manage. We saw incremental investments in productivity and efficiency improvements across the country. there were some significant SCADA and actuation projects implemented with a primary focus on safety and labour reductions. Rubicon commenced a research and development relationship with the University of Melbourne in 1998, focusing on the challenges of implementing large-scale channel automation technology. We released pilots of this technology in 2002, and 2 customers implemented pilots, one of them with 174 automated gates and the other with 90 automated gates. And then we were encumbered with drought. It is now recognised that this drought actually started in 1997, but it didn't become evident until 2002-2003, when for the first time in history the Victorian systems failed to meet the customer needs. At that time, the policy was to allocate all of the water available in the dams, plus the worst historic inflow into the dams. But of course, when the inflows were less than the worst ever, water was allocated to farmers that didn't exist. This created some significant challenges, and this was at exactly the same time that our new technology was being introduced. Elements of this technology were to implement new and accurate water meters. This process clearly identified how badly the old technology performed and indeed underread. This is how the systems were operated. This is an example of water leaking out of an open earth canal that the technology could identify by running real-time accounts of where the water was going. This illustrates for the 12-year period between 1996 and 2009 just how extreme the reduction in precipitation was. The 2 pilots that I mentioned proved to be very successful, and when the most severe drought occurred in 2006 and 2007, this really registered with the governments and the water authorities. And as you will see on the next slide, the hydrology in Australia has been changing significantly. This is from the inflows over a 100-year period to the city of Perth in the west of Australia, and you can see 3 defined step-level changes in annual inflows. This is the Murray River system, I beg your pardon. Where you can see a major step change here. So what was the response? The policy responses were to develop water sharing plans on the basis of the new sustainable available water resources. There were further regulatory reforms introduced to streamline the procedures for water trading. New standards were developed for metering. Extensive networks of brokers and agents were developed to facilitate market-based trade. And the City of Melbourne, a city of 4 million people, was at the risk of running out of water. The action in Victoria was for the government to allocate $1 billion to invest in technology to improve the distribution of the available water, and that resulted in the apportionment of those water savings to the City of Melbourne, farmers and the environment. The government established a new agency to implement these changes, and Shortly after this process was established, the federal government announced $10 billion of investment available, and Victoria secured another $1 billion of that investment. And the technological response is what our company has been involved in, where our technology was chosen initially in the state of Victoria to automate the 6,800 kilometres of open channel and the 20,000 farm outlets. The initial implementation was on 3,000 kilometres of what was referred to as backbone channel, with the objective of eliminating the spills from the end of the channels, improving the customer service by reducing the time needed to lodge an order, to provide consistent and high flow rates, to support optimal surface irrigation, to eliminate metre error, to rationalise some channels and meters, and to use the technology combined with electromagnetic surveys to have complementary investments in channel lining. Just very quickly, as the time is ticking by, the system now in its current state has 65 radio towers, solar powered, distributed across an area of 500,000 hectares, 12,500 sites connected in real time, 81 updates a second, 2.3 million time variables, 2 billion time series. This is an example of some of the canal lining. Concrete is not the favoured material for lining canals in Australia. High density polyethylene proven to be cheaper and more effective. Software systems, new farmer outlets. The technology responses on farm has been to introduce soil moisture probes, on-farm scheduling into broadacre agriculture. Previously, this has only been practiced in the high-value horticulture and viticulture industries. And given there was a significant sunk investment in laser grading, the automation of surface irrigation was a very popular strategy. What does the industry look like now? I'm pressed for time, but now we see that the distribution efficiencies have risen between 20 to 25%. Efficiencies in one system have been documented at 95%, and this has made the saved water available for extra production or return to the environment. Farmers can now use their smartphone to order water within 2 hours and to have the system completely autonomously regulate the water from the source of supply to the farm outlet, reducing labour, reducing vehicle and fuel costs, improving safety. And what the table shows here is the technology and the policy reforms over a 20-year period have seen the water move from lower value crops to higher value crops. And you'll see that cotton, which wasn't grown 20 years ago, is now becoming one of the dominant crops in the Murrumbidgee Irrigation District. Just another illustration of how the water has moved from lower to higher value crops. There's been major advances in productivity for many crops, as you can see by the graphics. And finally, the future. We've heard a lot about ag tech, big data, precision agriculture. There is absolutely no doubt that a big data approach to enable plant needs to be met optimally on a catchment basis are within reach. Some of the technologies that are available now, GPS mapping of soils, irrigation units, crop plantings, networks of sensors on farm for soil moisture, rainfall, evaporation, nutrients, remote sensing of crop inputs and outputs, improved accuracy and resolution of weather forecasts across whole catchments, automated channel systems, harmonised dam and river operations, and perhaps most importantly, transparent, timely and accurate information available for all. I'm sorry I've run a little bit over time, but thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Tony.